Welcome, the anointed ones. Some people don't want to heal. They just want a cleaner host. It's wild how human nature works. Someone can burn down every bridge in their life, then show up to yours with a bucket of charm and a smirk, acting like they're just passing through, when really they came to siphon validation. Studies in behavioral psychology have shown that people who can't face their own failures often attach themselves to someone succeeding just to feel alive again. It's not admiration, it's emotional squatting. And that's exactly what happened here. Someone who wrecked their own life tried to use yours as a quick ego rehab, a confidence refill station. They thought standing next to your light would make them look less dim. They tried to borrow your peace like a Netflix password. No payment, no gratitude, just pure entitlement. But here's the plot twist. When ego meets authenticity, humility always wins. The same person who thought you were their comeback accessory ended up discovering you were their wake-up call. They thought they could outshine you by using you, but all they did was expose their own cracks under divine lighting. So today, we're diving into why they got humbled, not out of pettiness, but divine poetry. Because sometimes the most satisfying justice isn't revenge. It's watching someone realize you were never their stage. You were their lesson. And let's be honest. If irony had a favorite flavor, it would be this. The same person who tried to stand on your back to feel tall now has to watch you rise higher than their imagination ever reached. Buckle up, this one's going to sting, but also deeply satisfy your soul. Number 1. They didn't want to heal. They wanted a mirror that lied. They didn't want to heal. They wanted a mirror that lied. That's the hard truth most people never admit. When someone has destroyed their own peace, they don't look for accountability, they look for distraction. You became their favorite distraction because your energy made them feel like they were improving without actually doing the work. They didn't want reflection. They wanted illusion. They wanted your presence to whisper, "You're still a good person," even when their behavior said otherwise. At first, they were drawn to your calmness, your clarity, your sense of direction. You became a type of emotional rehab for their chaos. They fed on your energy because it made them forget what they'd become. But healing can't happen by osmosis. They couldn't handle that your peace wasn't a performance. It was a product of discipline, honesty, and hard choices. You forced them to face the truth that their wounds weren't from bad luck, but from bad patterns. That truth was too bright, too unfiltered, too real. So they tried to rewrite the narrative. If they could manipulate your perception, they wouldn't have to confront their own reflection. They wanted your validation to be their bandage. They wanted your empathy to replace their effort. When that didn't work, they turned defensive. They called you cold, distant, ungrateful, all because you stopped letting them use your light to hide their shadows. They didn't hate you. They hated what your presence revealed. That they had work to do, and you weren't going to do it for them. There's something almost comical about how quickly admiration can turn into resentment when ego gets involved. The very qualities they once praised became the ones they despised. Your boundaries suddenly became arrogance. Your self-respect became selfishness. They wanted you to keep reflecting a version of them that didn't exist anymore. When you stopped pretending, they cracked, because their entire sense of worth was built on your approval. In the end, their downfall wasn't your doing, it was their denial. You didn't destroy their illusion, truth did. And truth doesn't play favorites, it simply exposes. You didn't break them, you just stopped lying for them. And when the mirror refused to flatter, they finally saw what they'd been running from all along, themselves. Number 2, they wanted access to your energy, not accountability for theirs. They didn't come close to you because they wanted connection. They came because they wanted energy. There's a big difference between someone who values you and someone who uses you to feel valuable. They saw your peace, your growth, your inner steadiness, and mistook it for an unlimited power source they could just plug into. The problem is, people like that don't see your energy as sacred. They see it as supply. Every compliment they gave was just bait. Every deep talk was a quiet transaction. They didn't want to grow with you. They wanted to drain you. At first, they disguised it well. They showed interest, empathy, curiosity. But it wasn't because they cared. It was because your stability made them feel balanced. The moment you weren't available to charge their low battery, their true nature showed. Suddenly, you were different. You were distant. You were changing. What really happened is that you stopped being their emotional generator. You stopped letting them take without giving back. People who refuse to take responsibility for their own energy always try to feed off someone who does. It's how they survive. They'll tell sob stories to pull your empathy, use guilt to keep you close, and play the victim so you'll keep pouring into them. But here's the twist. They're not helpless. They just refuse to grow because draining others is easier than rebuilding themselves. And when you stop being their source, they act like you betrayed them. They don't see that you're not being cruel. You're protecting your peace. You didn't cut them off out of hate. You did it out of clarity. You realized that someone who constantly needs saving will eventually drown you too. So you stepped back, and that's when their ego cracked. They couldn't handle that you stopped responding to their pull. The same person who acted like they didn't need you started collapsing without you. That's the real humbling, realizing the energy they once mocked was the same energy that kept them functioning. They came thinking they could absorb your light. Instead, they got exposed by it, and the moment you stopped letting them borrow your strength, life showed them just how weak manipulation really is when the source cuts the cord. Number 3. They confused admiration with entitlement. They admired you, but they didn't respect what it took to become you. That's the part people never admit. They envy the glow, but ignore the grind. They looked at your peace like it was something you just stumbled into, not something you bled for. They wanted your wisdom without having to face the pain that gave it birth. They wanted your confidence without going through the rejection, isolation, and lessons that shaped it. To them, your results looked effortless because they never saw the nights you cried, questioned yourself, and kept going anyway. So they tried to copy the outcome without walking through the process. They started imitating your tone, your habits, your mindset. But imitation has no roots. It always falls apart when life tests it. What they didn't realize is that your strength was built through surrender, not performance. You had to break to rebuild. You had to lose to learn. And while they were busy trying to skip the suffering, they skipped the substance too. Their admiration slowly turned sour because your life exposed the shortcuts they took. They couldn't understand why things fell apart for them when they were doing the same things. But what they missed is that alignment can't be faked. Energy doesn't lie. You can't pretend your way into grace. You have to grow into it. They saw your peace as proof that you were lucky. But it was really proof that you were disciplined. The moment they realized your glow wasn't for sale, their ego panicked. It's one thing to envy someone's success, but it's another to realize that success requires self-confrontation. That's the part ego can't stand, accountability. So instead of facing themselves, they blamed you. They started finding flaws, twisting stories, doing anything to convince themselves that you weren't that special. Because if you were truly that genuine, then it meant their whole performance was empty. But the truth has a way of separating the real from the rehearsed. Over time, your consistency exposed their imitation. Your growth highlighted their stagnation. And the very person who once thought they could catch up by copying you, was forced to see that authenticity can't be duplicated. You can borrow someone's style, but you can't fake their soul. They confused admiration with entitlement, and life humbled them for it. Number 4. They tried to make you a trophy in their broken narrative. They wanted to use you as proof that they weren't as lost as they truly were. To them, standing next to someone genuine made them feel redeemed, like your light could erase the stains on their name. They didn't want you for who you were. They wanted what being associated with you did for their image. You became their human evidence that they were still relevant, still good, still wanted by someone of value. You weren't a partner in growth. You were a prop in their performance. Every compliment, every show of affection, every public association was less about connection and more about presentation. They wanted to borrow your reputation, to rebuild the illusion of their own. It was subtle at first. They'd brag about knowing you, name-drop you, or echo your wisdom as if it were their own. They craved the credibility your name carried because they'd lost all of theirs. Your integrity made them feel important by proximity. The same people who once mocked authenticity started claiming it because you made it look powerful. But the truth has a way of demanding proof. The longer they stood beside you, the more obvious it became that they weren't cut from the same fabric. You see, real energy can't be faked indefinitely. Sooner or later, masks slip. They tried to hold onto your light, but light exposes everything, including what's pretending to shine. Their act began to crumble under the weight of their own insincerity. They couldn't keep up with the purity they tried to imitate because they hadn't earned it. That's when the switch flipped. They went from idolizing you to resenting you, from flaunting your presence to quietly competing with it. It's a fragile ego's pattern. What they can't genuinely become, they eventually try to tear down. And when the truth finally came to the surface, they were left exposed, not because you exposed them, but because their intentions did. You weren't their trophy. You were the mirror they didn't want to face. They wanted to be seen as renewed, but you revealed how much healing they still avoided. That's why the connection collapsed, because you were never meant to validate their illusion. You were placed in their life to test it. And when the test came, they failed. Not because they weren't capable of change, but because they wanted recognition more than redemption. Number 5, they mistook your grace for gullibility. They thought your grace made you an easy target. They looked at your calmness and mistook it for naivety, not realizing that self-control is one of the rarest and most misunderstood forms of power. You saw through their games, but you chose not to expose them immediately. Not because you were afraid, but because you understood timing. Grace doesn't rush to prove a point. It allows truth to ripen on its own. They thought they were getting away with manipulation, but what they were really doing was writing the script for their own exposure. Your forgiveness confused them. People who thrive on control can't comprehend compassion that isn't self-serving. They thought you kept forgiving because you couldn't see their intentions, when in reality you saw everything and chose peace over performance. You knew your reaction would be used against you, so you gave them patience instead, a form of judgment they didn't recognize. That's the thing about grace. It looks soft on the surface, but it dismantles pride from the inside out. As they tested you, they mistook your boundaries for indecision. They thought they could keep pushing because you kept staying calm, but every act of restraint was you handing them enough rope to expose their character. You weren't trying to win an argument. You were letting the truth win for you. And when it finally did, the same silence they mocked became the proof of your strength. You didn't have to shout. You didn't have to prove who was right. Their downfall did that for you. It's humbling how quickly arrogance collapses when it runs out of reactions to feed on. They needed you to explode, to defend yourself, to fight, because that's where manipulators draw their power. But you starved them of it. You let them talk, perform, and dig deeper into their own illusion until they had nowhere left to hide. And that's when grace turned into judgment. They learned the hard way that grace is not weakness. It's wisdom wrapped in restraint. It's the art of knowing you're protected without needing to prove it. You never lost your voice. You just refused to waste it on noise. And while they were busy mistaking your stillness for stupidity, God was already preparing their lesson in humility, signed, sealed, and delivered by their own actions. Number 6. They were addicted to applause, not alignment. They were addicted to being seen, not to being real. Their sense of worth was built on attention, not authenticity. Every move they made, every word they spoke was a silent audition for approval. They didn't want truth. They wanted applause. They wanted an audience that clapped for their image, not friends who could see through it. When you came into their life, you didn't play that game. And that's what shook them. You didn't feed their performance. You didn't clap when you saw the cracks. You stood still, quiet, discerning. And that silence was louder than any praise they'd ever received. To someone addicted to validation, genuine energy feels threatening. They can't handle people who see them beyond their performance because authenticity exposes their dependency. You represented the one thing they couldn't fake: peace. While they performed, you lived. While they rehearsed, you reflected. Being around you made them uneasy because your energy didn't respond to status or spectacle. It responded to truth. And truth is poison to pretense. They tried to use your presence as proof of their new chapter. You became the backdrop of their redemption story, the prop that made them look healed. They loved telling people how far they'd come, how different they were, how much they'd grown. But growth isn't in words, it's in consistency. And that's where they started to crumble. Because the same performance that got them applause couldn't sustain under your discernment. You didn't see their act, you saw their avoidance. Eventually they grew tired, not because you exposed them, but because their mask became too heavy to wear around you. That's what real energy does. It drains what's fake. It makes liars sweat and pretenders stumble. The more they tried to act confident, the more insecure they looked next to your calm. The same stage they built for validation became the site of their collapse. Their downfall wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. The applause stopped. The audience moved on. And when the lights dimmed, they were left face to face with what they'd been avoiding all along. Themselves. You weren't their stage. You were their mirror. And mirrors don't lie, no matter how many times ego tries to edit the reflection. Number 7. Their confidence was just a loud disguise for rotting self-worth. Their confidence was nothing more than a mask made of noise. Every boast, every over-the-top statement, every exaggerated story was just an attempt to drown out the sound of their own insecurity. Deep down, they knew something inside them had decayed. Their sense of worth, their peace, their authenticity. But instead of facing that emptiness, they learned to perform. They became loud, not because they were sure of themselves, but because silence would have forced them to hear their own truth. They wore arrogance like armor. It wasn't power, it was protection. They needed to look superior just to feel stable. And the more fragile they felt on the inside, the more grand they acted on the outside. You could see through it, the overconfidence, the constant need to one-up, the way they turned everything into a subtle competition. It wasn't ambition, it was desperation. They couldn't stand the way your calm confidence made their performance look like a circus. Your quiet strength disturbed them because it made them confront the difference between being seen and being secure. They wanted to impress, but you wanted to evolve. They wanted claps, but you wanted peace. That contrast made them restless. So they tried to provoke you, to get a reaction, to prove they could still control the energy in the room. That's how egos feed. Not on love or truth, but on attention. But you didn't give it to them. You didn't play their game, and that's when they started to shrink. Your indifference exposed them in a way no argument ever could. When you stopped reacting, their fake confidence began to deflate. They were no longer the loudest person in the room. They were just the emptiest. And when they couldn't feed on your validation anymore, they had to face what was left, themselves. That's where humility found them. True confidence doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't shout, compete, or prove. It simply exists. And that's what broke them. The realization that your quiet composure came from real work, while theirs came from rehearsed pride. The air left their performance not because you fought them, but because you stopped fueling it. And when ego finally suffocates without attention, all that remains is the raw truth. And that truth humbled them more than any confrontation ever could. Number 8. You were the lighthouse they tried to drown. You were never in competition with them. You were just being yourself. But to someone living in darkness, light feels like an attack. You didn't brag, you didn't compare, you didn't even try to outshine anyone. You simply lived in truth. Yet that truth exposed everything they'd been hiding under charm, excuses, and false confidence. Your presence became uncomfortable for them because it showed the difference between progress and performance. You weren't trying to make them feel small. They just couldn't stand seeing what accountability looks like in human form. They wanted to drown your light, not because it blinded them, but because it reminded them. It reminded them of all the things they'd buried, the potential they wasted, the integrity they compromised, the promises they broke to themselves. Every time you walked into the room with calm assurance, it highlighted how lost they still were. They started treating your glow like a threat when it was actually an invitation to grow. But people attached to ego don't want to evolve. They want to erase whatever makes them uncomfortable. They tried to discredit you, mock your peace, twist your intentions, and convince others that your confidence was arrogance. They thought if they threw enough shade, it would dim your light. But here's the irony. You can't drown light. You can cover it for a moment, but eventually it burns through every attempt to hide it. That's exactly what happened. The more they tried to silence you, the louder your authenticity became. You didn't need to fight back. Light doesn't argue with darkness. It exposes it. You became a quiet kind of justice in their story. Without saying a word, your consistency revealed their inconsistency. Your growth revealed their stagnation. Your peace revealed their unrest. That's why they couldn't stand you. Not because you wronged them, but because you reminded them of who they pretended not to be anymore. In the end, their attempts to drown you only made your light stronger. The waves they sent to extinguish you became the very thing that tested and proved your endurance. You didn't just survive, you glowed through it. And now, every time they see you shine, they're reminded that light doesn't compete. It simply exposes what darkness tried to hide. Number 9. They were obsessed with control, because they'd lost control of themselves. Control was their coping mechanism. Deep down, they knew their own life had spun out of balance, but instead of facing their disorder, they tried to manage someone else's. That's what people do when they've lost grip on themselves. They shift their focus outward, manipulating, micromanaging, and dominating, all in an attempt to feel in charge again. You became their emotional anchor, the person they thought they could steer, because controlling you felt easier than confronting their own chaos. They confused leadership with domination, guidance with interference. Everything about your independence threatened them, because your peace was proof that self-control was possible. They couldn't stand the fact that you didn't need rescuing, that you moved through life without begging for permission or validation. Your calm made them restless, your freedom made them anxious, and your ability to stand firm made them feel powerless. So, to restore their sense of superiority, they tried to chip away at your confidence. Subtle criticism here, emotional manipulation there, little mind games designed to make you question yourself. But control is a fragile illusion. The more they tried to orchestrate your life, the more obvious it became that they were the ones enslaved, not you. They were slaves to fear, to insecurity, to the desperate need to feel relevant. They thought they could puppeteer your emotions, but they ended up dancing to the rhythm of their own dysfunction. Every attempt to dominate you only revealed how unstable they were internally. The tighter they tried to grip, the more everything slipped through their fingers. You never had to fight them directly. Spiritual law doesn't need your defense. It simply balances what's unbalanced. Manipulation always loops back. They tried to control you to feel in charge, and life flipped the mirror. Suddenly they were the ones being controlled by the consequences of their own actions. The same games they played to weaken you became the very traps they fell into. They thought they were teaching you who's boss. Instead, they learned that no one wins against divine order. Peace can't be manipulated, and purpose can't be puppeteered. They tried to rearrange your stability, but all they did was expose their own chaos. And when the strings snapped, they realized too late. You were never the puppet. You were the proof that real power doesn't control. It aligns. Number 10. They wanted your reaction more than your respect. They weren't interested in building a connection with you. They were obsessed with controlling how you felt. Their whole sense of power depended on manipulating your emotions. Anger, doubt, sadness, frustration, any reaction from you was like a trophy in their distorted reality. They didn't need your respect, your understanding, or your acknowledgement. They needed your energy to feed their ego. Every word, every move, every expression from you was a measurement of their dominance. If you faltered, they triumphed. If you defended yourself, they celebrated. Your humanity became their playground. But you refused to play. You didn't engage in their games, you didn't argue, you didn't prove a point. Your indifference didn't mean weakness. It meant you understood the rules of power they refused to learn. You knew that giving them a reaction was like handing them a drug that would only make their addiction stronger. By staying calm, you cut them off from the supply they craved. You denied them the highs they relied on to feel significant. And that denial, it hit harder than any confrontation ever could. What they didn't understand is that it wasn't your absence that unsettled them. It was the reflection they saw when your attention no longer fed their delusion. In your silence, they faced a mirror they couldn't escape. Their ego, their dependence on control, their emptiness. That's why they spiraled. That's why they acted out, lashed, and tried to reclaim some sense of dominance. They weren't angry at you. They were panicking at the truth. Without your energy, they were forced to face their own insignificance. Your calm became the test they failed without even realizing it. They expected submission or reaction, but instead they got quiet strength. You didn't need to prove anything because your existence alone exposed their illusions. And in the end, the very thing they tried to manipulate, your emotions, became the mechanism that humbled them. You weren't their puppet, and their ego couldn't survive the detox from the attention it had depended on for so long. Number 11. They couldn't handle that you became everything they pretended to be. They built an image, not a self. Their entire identity was a performance. Curated smiles, recycled wisdom quotes, and surface-level peace that cracked whenever no one was watching. They wanted people to believe they had evolved, but deep down, they were still haunted by comparison, envy, and unhealed wounds. You were the silent proof that everything they pretended to be could actually exist for real, without theatrics, without an audience, without validation. And that truth alone shook them. It's one thing to fake calm when life is easy. It's another to embody peace after surviving chaos. They wanted the appearance of strength without the discipline, the language of healing without the sacrifice. You became a mirror that reflected everything they were afraid to confront, the gap between their projection and their reality. The more grounded you became, the more exposed they felt. They weren't angry at your progress. They were terrified of what it said about theirs. Your growth dismantled their illusion. Every time you leveled up, it stripped another layer of their facade. Their spiritual talk sounded empty beside your quiet stability. Their confidence looked fragile next to your rooted calm. They had built their worth on the perception of wisdom, but you lived it. And that's the part that crushed them. Not your success, not your glow-up, but the effortless way you became what they spent their life pretending to be. Life has a way of exposing what's real. Performance can only last so long before authenticity walks in and dissolves the act. That was the moment of reckoning for them, when the show ended and all that was left was the difference between imitation and embodiment. They weren't ready for the truth that pretending to be whole doesn't make you healed, and quoting peace doesn't mean you've found it. You did the internal work they avoided. You built in silence what they only talked about in public, and when that truth surfaced, it humbled them in ways no words could, because authenticity will always outlast the act. Number 12. You were their wake-up call, not their wound. They needed a villain to stay comfortable. It's easier to blame someone else than to confront the reflection that's been whispering, "You've been living a lie." You became that reflection, not out of malice, but out of presence. Your honesty, your energy, your refusal to play along with their self-deception all served as divine disruption. You didn't destroy their peace. You revealed that what they called peace was denial. And when denial shatters, it feels like pain, but it's actually truth trying to set you free. They mistook your boundaries for betrayal, your detachment for cruelty, your silence for judgment. But in reality, you were the first person who refused to feed their delusion. You showed them the consequence of ignoring inner work. Every mask they'd carefully maintained began to slip in your presence, because authenticity exposes what pretends to be whole. It wasn't your words that broke them. It was your refusal to conform to their fantasy. People who are used to control often interpret correction as attack. You were never trying to destroy them. You were simply unwilling to shrink for their comfort. The truth you carried had weight, and when it touched their fragile ego, it cracked. What felt like you hurting them was really life confronting them through you. You became the mirror they spent years avoiding, the test they didn't know they were taking. And when you passed, they had to face the reality that they'd been failing themselves. The irony is, they'll remember you long after the anger fades, not as the enemy they claimed you were, but as the wake-up call that changed their trajectory, because eventually even the proud are forced to admit who told them the truth first. You weren't their downfall, you were their doorway. And though they may never thank you out loud, life will remind them of it every time they choose growth over illusion. You weren't the wound, you were the mirror that refused to lie. Number 13. Their karma was watching you win without needing them. There's no louder judgment than silence that thrives. They expected to be your downfall, the missing piece that made your peace collapse. But instead, Their departure became the start of your ascension. You didn't just survive without them. You sharpened. You grew steadier, clearer, stronger. They were waiting for your weakness to validate their worth. But you turned the plot. Their ego couldn't process that the very person they tried to diminish became living proof that they were never essential, just temporary. Manipulators feed on dependency. They don't want love, they want leverage, and when you broke free from their emotional leash, they lost the illusion of power. They thought removing themselves would leave you crawling back for approval, but what actually happened was divine irony. God used their exit as your elevation. Every attempt to make you need them only revealed that you never did. They were a detour that taught you self-trust, not your destination. Now, the karma plays out quietly. They scroll, they watch, they hear your name echo in rooms they once tried to lock you out of. They see your peace growing without their permission. Every milestone you reach is a mirror they can't look away from, a reflection of what they forfeited when they chose ego over empathy. Their loss isn't your success. Your success just exposes what their pride destroyed. The real humbling isn't just watching you win. It's realizing they never even understood what winning meant. They chased validation while you built value. They sought attention while you found alignment. They were performing for approval. You were preparing for purpose. And when life rewarded you, it wasn't revenge. It was revelation. You didn't have to announce your healing or prove your worth. The quiet continuation of your growth became the loudest sermon they'll ever hear. They tried to break you to feel powerful, but your endurance rewrote the entire script. Now, they're forced to face the truth. Your strength was never dependent on them. It was discovered in spite of them. That's karma's poetry. You didn't just move on, you leveled up. And the view from your peace is the punishment they never saw coming. Number 14. God used you as a living contrast between what's real and what's ruined. Your existence became the standard they couldn't reach. Every choice you made, every lesson you endured, every quiet victory, it all contrasted sharply with the chaos they created in their own lives. You didn't need to argue, justify, or perform. Time and consistency did the proving for you. They thought they could ride your reputation, borrow your credibility, and inflate themselves by standing in your shadow. But the universe doesn't let illusions survive in the presence of truth. Every move they made to exploit you only highlighted the gap between their intent and reality. God used your life as a living, breathing testament of alignment and integrity. You became proof that authenticity carries weight without needing applause. While they scrambled to manipulate perception, your energy quietly and powerfully exposed what pretense looks like when it's stripped bare. Their attempts to control your narrative, to leverage your name for their gain, bounced back on them. Every plot to diminish you became evidence of your elevation. Your consistency, your patience, your ability to endure and thrive. It all became a silent sermon, a lesson on what happens when life is lived in truth rather than ego. Their humiliation wasn't punishment. It was divine reflection. Every crack in their performance, every falter, every realization of their own inadequacy was a mirror held up by the universe itself. It wasn't that you sought revenge or made them stumble. You simply existed fully in alignment, and in doing so, you revealed the consequences of unchecked pride. They thought ego could hijack destiny, but destiny has its own law. Every attempt to manipulate or diminish you turned into evidence of their miscalculation, proof that alignment always overpowers arrogance. Your life became contrast, a standard against which failure and integrity were measured. You didn't need to fight, because truth never loses to pretense. Every time they reflected on what you accomplished or how you carried yourself, they faced a quiet, undeniable revelation. Some things cannot be faked, borrowed, or stolen. Integrity, resilience, and purpose can only be earned, and that revelation humbled them more than any confrontation ever could. You didn't just survive their attempts to exploit you, you became the proof that divine justice is precise, patient, and inevitable. All of this comes down to one undeniable truth. You cannot be used, manipulated, or diminished by someone else's chaos without your consent. And the universe will always honor that boundary. Every person who tried to exploit your light, feed off your energy, or steal your peace ended up exposing themselves, not you. They mistook your grace for weakness, your silence for submission, your growth for competition. Yet with every attempt to control, dominate, or manipulate, they only set the stage for their own humbling. Your life became the measure of authenticity, resilience, and divine alignment. You didn't have to fight, argue, or justify yourself. Time, truth, and integrity did all the work for you. Every manipulator who thought they could borrow your energy learned the hard way that true power cannot be leased, copied, or faked. They saw your strength, wisdom, and peace, and realized too late that these things are earned, not borrowed. The very attempts they made to use you as an ego boost became the mirror reflecting their own shortcomings. Your growth became their test, your silence their rehab, your consistency their exposure. And in the midst of all their schemes and manipulations, you simply lived, thrived, and rose higher, proving that nothing external can derail a soul grounded in purpose and integrity. This is why your journey matters. Every time someone tried to dim your light, you became brighter. Every time someone sought to control you, you claimed freedom. Every time they tried to define your value, you redefined it for yourself. And in the process, you became a living testament to what happens when alignment meets resilience. The people who tried to use you for their gain end up humbled, while you rise unshakable, untouchable, and undeniably whole. So take this as a reminder. Nothing that was meant to break you can build them. Your energy, your integrity, and your truth are priceless, and the universe will always honor that. Stand firm, shine unapologetically, and never let anyone's ego dictate your path. If this message resonated with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss content like this. Like the video if it opened your eyes, comment below with your story of rising above manipulation, and share it with someone who needs to see the truth. The more we rise together, the more the world sees that authenticity always wins. God bless you.